Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to another episode of the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I'm your host, Kevin. I am Falcoholic Kevin, joined once again for his post-draft appearance. It's Thor Nystrom at ThorKU over at Fantasy Life once again. Thor, welcome back. It's always great this time of year, get you on several times because the Falcons, they don't always do good. They don't always do bad, but it seems like at least the last several years, it's always super interesting. Like there's lots to talk about, so it's definitely a fun show. Cause I know
that was Terry Fontenot calling me. He's like, "You're not going to rip me again on this show, are you?" And I had to give him the,
he's like, no, you got to wait till I'm done. You don't get to know yet, Terry. Yeah. But no, guys, last year we had Thor on to talk about Penix and all that. Very spicy show because Thor speaks his mind. He's not afraid to let people know. And on this show, we like to get all kinds of viewpoints on here from analysts, from Falcons people, from non-Falcons people, because I think that we'd be doing you a disservice if you just got my takes, which, are great, obviously. But, I think we can definitely hear from some other folks. And Thor, obviously, if you guys didn't see the previous show, Thor ranks at least 500 players in the Thor 500, which is up on Fantasy Life right now. So he's actually one of the people that can talk about the UDFAs instead of being like, well, I think I saw them on tape when I was watching someone else, So excited to get into it with you, Thor. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. And yeah, the had more criticizing for Atlanta last year. This one was interesting. The draft was very interesting for Atlanta. The post draft was very interesting for Atlanta. A very interesting draft process. A very interesting draft process from a front office that is on the hot seat. And you say this for him, a terrible terrier friend. He went for it over the weekend, over draft weekend. So yeah, excited to get into it, Kevin.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good show, guys. We're gonna break down Thor's thoughts on the draft class itself, but also, of course, the UDFAs, because if we got the UDFA whisperer here, we got to get takes on this UDFA class, which I know Thor is going to have his takes on it, but I even, before, based on my rankings of guys, like I had actually heard of like many of these UDFAs, which is usually like hasn't been the case the last several years. So definitely fun to get into. Real quick before we dive in, I want to bring you guys a quick word from our sponsor, BetOnline first. Guys, the first leg of the Triple Crown is behind us, the Kentucky Derby, but the rest is yet to come. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for all your Triple Crown info and sports betting action, as well, of course, as the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs, the MLB is going. The Braves seem to have revived themselves to some extent. I know times was tough here to start the season, but it's getting a little better. It sounds like they've also got, of course, UFC, boxing, all that good stuff. BetOnline's got you covered for all your online wagering info. And in between games, guys, you can head over to BetOnline's new online casino. They've got all the top Vegas style games, including poker, live slots, all that stuff. If that's your game, you can go check it out. And if you sign up, make sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to get access to the latest promotions. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, Thor. Well, I can't remember. We talked about him with Jaylen Walker. I think you were one of those guys that did have Jaylen Walker as like a top 10 type of prospect. So this is probably like, this is one of those weird things where like somehow I might maybe lower on like a Falcons draft pick than you, but I know you really liked Jaylen Walker, and I think we talked about him on the show that you were, neither one of us was expecting him to make it to Atlanta's pick. But he does fall, and Atlanta does actually jump on the opportunity to add Jaylen Walker. To just start us off, let's talk about that first pick.
I love the first pick, and Atlanta team, as needed all kinds of help in the front seven. Not just one starter, they needed multiple, and they ended up getting it. In terms of the price point on the first pick, I love that. He just falls right down to you. And Terry he's been a little bit finicky in the war rooms at times. It had to be nerve wracking for him, with Jaylen on the board there and then waiting for him to fall. But getting him in the slot that you did, very, very well done. It's a guy who's going to help you multiple different ways. Obviously, as the off-ball linebacker, I would imagine that is, the projection in the base defense, probably next to Diablo, right? Would that be your assumption too?
It sounds like, so what they've said so far, and this is one thing I actually really like about the new defensive coordinator and this stuff. They basically came out and told us exactly what everyone's going to do. They said Jaylen Walker is going to be primarily an edge rusher, and they will sort of build out his off-ball role over time. To me, that means he's probably going to play like more or less Sam linebacker in most fronts. Like he's going to basically just drop down and be kind of an overhang guy. But we'll see how they want to deploy it. But it seems like they want to use him mostly as like a pass rusher to start, and then they'll kind of build out the rest over time, which, probably good for him. But yeah, that seems to be their plan.
So instead of the room, so in other words, he'll be with Leonard Floyd and Pearce. You don't think he'll play as much of one of the two middle linebacker, the inside linebacker?
Yeah, I don't know that they're going to have him playing inside. I think he's going to be a Sam, like, overhang, and a guy that probably lines up like as a stand-up edge rusher like most of the time. But that's what they've said so far. So I found that interesting because I too was like, I don't know how much you can play him on early downs there. So maybe they'll have him just stand up and kind of play Sam more and on those downs. I'm not really sure, but it does sound like an interesting deployment. And to start, maybe they feel like he's just such a good pass rusher, they just don't want to throw too much on his plate right off the bat. But
that's interesting, and I wonder in camp if they end up changing their mind just a little bit on that, because the edge group now, even without him in it, Floyd and Pearce, solid projected starters, right? And then you have rotational guys that you can use, right? Trice, Abedaketi, etc. Right? So like the inside linebackers, they need some help there. And Walker on the early downs, in my opinion, that's what he should be doing. But either way, we both agree that was what the doctor ordered there, and you have the versatility there. So we'll see in camp. And I like the price point. That the second one, this is the decision I want to talk with you about, Kevin. Very interesting. Trading your first round pick next year to move back into the first round, especially at that point. Now, Pearce, and we talked about this in advance of the draft, and this one was vis-a-vis the idea of a trade down, right? Like, I believe in my last mock draft, I had Atlanta bailing out of the 15th pick and trading down to 33, I think, with a team coming up for a quarterback, and then Atlanta taking James Pearce at 33. Now, would James Pearce have gotten to 33? That wasn't the scenario, and we don't know. Definitely might not have. So getting him, I like that, because it was another, and we talked about this in advance of the draft. James Pearce was what this defense needed. You needed a speed rusher. You needed a guy to get after the quarterback, and so he definitely fit that. I would be reticent if I'm an Atlanta fan, the idea of trading next year's first round pick. That scares me. If Terry better be right.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, the potential for catastrophe is absolutely there. Like, that wasn't there before with that first round trade up. I think that's an angle that absolutely has to be considered as a part of the trade. I do think that, you didn't do this. I think your actual draft grade was very fair in that, like, you could see a path to it being a home run, basically, or the potential for catastrophe, which I think you had it as like a C roughly. So it's like,
I think I gave Atlanta I think a C plus.
Yeah,
C plus, which in my metrics is an above average grade.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, just based on my draft picks in slots metrics, Atlanta did better than that.
Yeah.
In terms of talent, I'm trying to find I got so many. I mean, Kevin,
I know you're working on a big piece at the moment that we're gonna plug later in the show. But
I have it in here somewhere. I might need a second to look for it. But Atlanta, they again, in the slots that they ended up picking, they got good value, and I would even toss Pearce into that. I saw him right around where they ended up getting him. I think I got it now. Atlanta, I had, let's see, their rankings and different things. So just in terms of the picks that they used, they spent the 13th most draft equity in the NFL. And I had them with the third highest ROI in those slots.
Yeah.
So that part of it, I like the picks that they made. They addressed the needs. All that was good. I have to bake in the risk of the Pearce move.
Yeah.
Because it's extremely high. If Atlanta flatlines next year and that pick ends up being top 5, that will be looked back upon as one of the worst trades in franchise history.
Yes.
Now, if Atlanta is a contender next year and that pick is at the end of the first round and James Pearce has over 10 sacks as a rookie, no one's going to be questioning it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of that has to do even with things outside of James Pearce.
Yeah. Yeah.
rights to, if that trade ends up working. But I just wanted to say that in advance, I did like the selections they made, and I didn't. In the past with Terry, and this, Kevin, I've criticized him for reaching above slot, especially early on picks of guys at non-premium positions that I thought he was yanking up the board. This time, again, in the slots that he selected, I thought he got strong value. I thought he addressed the team needs. But yeah, that thing is lingering over at the Falcons' performance the next year, and how big of an asset does that end up being that first-round pick next year?
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing so many national media, draft analysts really panning the class, because the assumption, of course, is that the Falcons will crash and burn, and therefore they will lose the trade, pretty significantly in terms of draft value. People don't seem to also say, like, if this pick is in the low 20s, even Atlanta could be coming out equal or above, like, winning the trade value. So, like, that is possible. I understand they haven't had. I understand more than most. They haven't had a winning season in 8 years, right? So you don't have to. I don't need to be reminded of that, guys. Thanks. But they kind of had to do this too. Is sort of how I think. That's why if you ask any Falcons fan, maybe aside from a few true haters, which it's remarkable, that they'd stick around, but every fan base has got them, the true haters. And you kind of just have to tip your cap, because people are really committed to that. But most Falcons fans, I'll say, very happy with it. And it's because, I think they were tired of this routine that we've been in ever since, that the team moved on from Dan Quinn, which is like, the team's not going to be terrible, but they're going to win 7-8 games and be just, it's not going to move the needle. They're not going to actually be competing, and they just don't seem to get better. So I think in this scenario, they kind of had to become aggressive, especially given that they didn't have free agency capital to spend, because they're going to have to deal with the Kirk Cousins thing. And that will clear up next year, thankfully, given, that the contract wasn't as bad as some quarterback contracts we've seen, Daniel Jones. But they don't have the free agency capital to spend. So if they really want to get aggressive to fix the pass rush, we know that if you're not taking pass rushers like early in the draft, you're probably not getting return quickly. Like you're going to have to wait. So if they wanted to get impact pass rushers, they kind of had to draft them early, and they added 2 of them. And, hopefully at least one works out.
Yeah, well, yeah, and they better, but yeah, I mean, good players there. Jaylen Walker, I had 7th on my board, and I expected him to go to Carolina.
Yeah.
I ended up agreeing with Carolina's decision, because, and it didn't have to do necessarily with McMillan against Walker. It was more the constitution of the wide receiver class against the constitution of the pass rushing class, or dash off ball, as far. Yeah, where there was just there was the drop after McMillan. There's a drop, in my opinion, after Golden. There was a drop after the 2 slot receivers next, on my board, right? Egbuka and Burden. So, I agreed with that. But that decision helped push Walker down the board. Love that pick. James Pearce, he might have been, every year, Kevin, as I do the 500 player big board with the 500 comps. I love seeing the battleship guys. That's why I call it battleship. And I had them in the exact same slot as they were selected in the draft.
Yeah. Pierce
might have been the only guy I got a battleship on this year. I had him 26th on my board. He ends up going 26th. Like the value there. And the speaking of value, in the last 3 picks, I adored the value. Yeah. I love Xavier Watts. We talked about Xavier Watts right on the last show. I love, and I know that you were a proselytizer as well.
Yeah, we were both Watts. Like Xavier Watts safety 2 guys. So
exactly. Yeah, I had him 37th on my board. I couldn't believe Xavier Watts fell out of the 2nd round, and then even into that's the latter half of round 3. What do you? Sometimes you want to ask the NFL, what exactly were you watching? Or is there something that I don't know? Because that to me, that one's unexplainable as far as his game. I comped him to Xavier McKinney, Xavier Watts, and then it wasn't just because of the first name.
That was too easy.
That was too easy. And then I love Billy Bowman. I don't know. Did we talk about Billy Bowman on the last show?
I don't know if we did, because I think we spent a lot of time talking about like Malachi Starks and Xavier Watts and stuff. But yeah, Bowman was a guy that I had considered as a safety, but the Falcons basically came out and said like, no, we think he's gonna play slot, and I was like, this makes so much sense, because Bowman's issue is that he's just not big enough really to be a box safety or to play, closer to the line of scrimmage. But as a slot, he's actually, his size is fine. Like, it's not really problematic. And he has great instincts for it. Like, you could see it. Like, he's played, 800 slot snaps over his career or something. So he's played plenty of slot. So I actually, and again, I appreciated it. It was like within 15 minutes of the pick, Jeff Ulbrich came out and was like, "Oh yeah, he's gonna play slot for us." Yeah, and it's like, "Oh great, okay, cool. We don't have to sit here and guess until training camp where guys are gonna play." I love it. So
that totally down with. I was on an Oklahoma Sooners show like in March, and they did the thing where they go through each of the Oklahoma guys that were in the draft class like individually, and I remember I went on this long tangent about Bowman. I love Bowman's game. But my whole thing was, I'm pretty sure that Bowman is a nickel defender at the next level. And for a lot of the reasons that you were talking about. And, I was like, I wonder if the NFL teams out there, they're going to end up agreeing with me on this. Because, yeah, his game, like, you have elements of, like you said, that there's elements of his game of a box safety, but the physical profile doesn't fit it. The guy's an absolute kamikaze. Yeah. Billy Bowman, it feels like there's a guy like this in every class where he's just always around the ball and his instincts are really good. And he plays like William Wallace and Braveheart, it's like die on the sword kind of a guy. And it seems like we have one in every, like Jaylen Petrie was one of those kind of guys. Brian Branch, to an extent, it was one of those guys. I suppose a better version of that in this class would be Malachi Starks, but Starks more talented, and Bowman is probably more fury on the field. Like, it's just it's a guy who doesn't know that he's small. I ended up comping Billy Bowman to Jaylen Petrie. I thought there was a lot of similarities there. I had Billy Bowman 73rd on my board. Guys like this archetype, it falls every year. In fact, I was surprised that Starks didn't fall, just not because he didn't deserve to go there, but because the NFL, for whatever reason, they have not figured out how to adequately value these guys. Petrie, his year, I had him as a first-round pick, and he got pushed down. Branch, same thing. I had him like top 12 or 15 prospect, and he ends up falling to round 2. I knew Bowman was going to go later than I had him. But again, qualitatively, that dude, I see him as a long-term starter at nickel. You get him closer to the ball. Again, he triggers immediately. He triggers fearlessly. He's getting in the backfield. I think you can start sending him after the quarterback too, situationally. You can do a lot of different stuff with that kid. And he's solid in coverage too.
Yeah.
There are the measurable limitations there, 5'10", 192, 76 percentile size adjusted athlete. But I love the game with Billy Bowman, and I appreciate that they came out right away. It's very clear Atlanta saw him just like I did of this guy's a nickel. I think Billy Bowman's game plays up even more at the next level as a nickel. And he was a good college player. So I love that pick too.
Yeah. I think it's, and we'll talk about, funny enough, like I think the 5th ranked player that they draft actually was one of their UDFAs. We'll talk about him later, but including him, like it seems like there was a clear sort of, and this is part of why I love this class so much. I think this team is finally on the same page, like with what they want. They have like a cohesive, like Jimmy Lake was a total disaster. It seemed like there was never really clarity about what he wanted to do. And, I think Raheem kind of, the first year is always sketchy for a new coach. I think fans kind of think that everything's just going to be a well-oiled machine immediately, even for guys who have been head coaches before. It's a lot more chaotic than anyone wants to admit. And I think it wasn't on the same page. It didn't work out. Kudos for just being like, we got to move on from this. This isn't going to work. This year, they bring in Ulbrich, and it seems like the plan is much more in place. They want to cause disruption up front. They get 2 guys to help the pass rush. And then they bring in ball hawks in the secondary with Watts, with Bowman, with the UDFA we're going to talk about. I think they added by far the most interceptions and pass breakups of like any team in the NFL in this class.
Definitely. So all you had to do was draft Xavier.
Right.
But Bowman helps too.
Yeah. And Bryant had a bunch too. So, the unnamed guy, every Falcons fan knows who we're talking about. But, but yeah, I mean, so I love those 4 picks. And that was like, after those 4, I started, and those are really the only notable Falcons picks in terms of like top capital. We do have 1 7th rounder that I know you are a fan of as well that we'll talk about in just a second. But this to me, it was kind of so different from years past where maybe the Falcons would kind of hit on one of these values or go after someone who was falling, but they seem to mostly do their own thing. this year was very much, it seemed like, I don't know if it's a coincidence, I don't know what's going on, but there was more of an emphasis on value. Jalen Walker, great value. James Pearce, good value. Xavier Watts, outstanding value. Bowman, great value as well. Like every pick, they were nailing the value of these guys. So I don't know exactly what changed there, but I like it.
Well, yeah, it's you know, I mean, sometimes in life to change, you have to confront your mortality, right? And I think Terrible Terry has confronted his mortality. That's a guy that knows if we don't win next year, I'm out of here. And if there's not a cohesive plan, et cetera, I'm out of here. He obviously took this draft class more seriously, you know, in my opinion, than in previous ones. And there was a more, obviously the aggression, and that aggression could go either way with that one move. But the aggression we saw in that move, it bled over to the UDFA process. And a team in Atlanta, let me pull up my write-up here because I got into their past ones. So now the past two cycles, this is where Atlanta finished in my UDFA rankings. You know, I'd have to look and do you recall if any UDFAs hung the last couple of years on their roster?
The last one I can remember that was really the last one I can remember that has really stuck around and made an impact is Ryan Newsel from like many years ago, who's probably going to be their starting center now. But you know, they haven't really, like under Dan Quinn, they were really good at finding guys. I know he wasn't really a UDFA, but they brought in D. Alford from the CFL a couple years back, and he had a really good year. And then last year, the Jimmy Lake defense did not work out with him. But yeah, they haven't hit on many. They've had some stick around, but not really too much in the way of guys really contributing.
So these are my, like, in the moment, you know, again, like I'm ranking them right after the draft, the UDFA classes. And so, you know, take it for what it's worth. But the last two cycles, Atlanta finished bottom 4 in my UDFA class rankings each year. So each of the last 2 years. Last year, number 32 out of 32. It was like they weren't even trying in the UDFA process. This time around, and I can break this news. This column will be out tomorrow on Fantasy Life, my NFC UDFA rankings. But don't tell my bosses. I will reveal to you guys where Atlanta finished. Number 2 in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Number 2 in the NFL. And I was telling Kevin off air, there was 3 teams this year with their UDFA classes that were heads and shoulders of anyone else, where the value that they extracted from UDFAs as I quantify them on my pre-draft board, where they were essentially double. There was the gap between the number 4 team and these 3 teams were like double, you know, over that or more. And Atlanta, again, being number 2, very, very aggressive. Yeah. Atlanta comes out of the UDFA process with 3 different guys that I ranked pre-draft top 225 prospects. So, you know, it's not only draftable, but a couple of these guys I really like. Kobe Bryant, you're talking about him. I had him 102 on my board. Mm-hmm. I like Kobe Bryant's game. Joshua Gray, what position? You know, this is a guy who played tackle, guard. I don't know if he caught center in college, but I think his best projection is center. But he played multiple different places. Again, I think he's moving inside next level, but I had him 189 on my board. I was surprised that he didn't get drafted. I was surprised Kobe too, although I got a little bit more information on that. I'll get into that in a second. And then Nick Nash, the receiver from San Jose State, I had him at 225. He's got skill, Nick Nash. The athletic profile is not the best. So we'll see if he is able to overcome that at the next level, but former quarterback, you could do different stuff with him, and he has reliable hands. He knows how to run a route, and he caught 1 billion balls last year. So I thought Nick Nash had a real shot to get drafted. But the top 2 guys I was surprised about. You want to get into Kobe Bryant first? Yeah,
we could do Bryant first because I know you have maybe some more information on maybe potentially why he fell. But yeah, I saw him basically the same way as like basically a 4th round pick. I know my co-host Trayshawn Diaz was like all in after the Shrine Bowl where he just kind of crushed it there, and everybody seemed to love his personality is one of his best traits, right? I mean, he's he's all chirp team. You know, he's
Yes.
going to get in your face, and I love cornerbacks that do that because I feel like if you're not chirping, you know, I don't know what you're doing out there because that's a position where like the mental toughness is so critical each and every down because you're going to get your ass kicked. Like in the NFL especially, even the best corners, you're going to get your ass kicked. You got to be able to jump back up and let the wide receiver know that it didn't bother you. Like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you get away with that. You ain't gonna get away with that again. You know, like I mean, he would use probably more colorful words than that, but you know, he's a hell of a lot of fun. And I love players like that, no matter what. So.
Yeah, Kobe. Now, I got a lot of context here because Kobe Bryant went to my alma mater, Kansas. Okay. So I watched, you know, every snap that Kobe took live. You know, I don't miss a Kansas game, and I really like his game. And the year before, last spring, Kobe considered, or I guess it would have been late last winter, considered declaring for that draft, and I believe he was given a day 3 thing from the advisory committee. And basically the feedback he got is you have to work on your body. You're too thin, you know, and then run defense was like the part of his game that you know, in particular, his run defense improved this year. He did add a couple pounds. It's tough for him because he has that sort of long, angular, wiry, you know, type of build. So it's like, how much weight are you able to add on that? In the NFL, if we could even get him 185, 190 would be the best. You know, he played a little bit under 180. I believe he weighed into the pre-draft process at 180. So yeah, we want to try to get him as close to 190 as possible. But I again, in his defense, I will say he got more involved he heard that messaging and he got more involved in the run game this season. The thing that I was, and he had a good year. This guy absolutely by his game should have been drafted. I heard that he struggled in the interview process. You know, as far as what teams took away from that, you know, I'm not in there. Yeah. So that's a black box for me. The interview processes, they were put under the spotlight. This process, as you know, because of the Shadir Sanders thing, where a guy who, either was going to be a first rounder or at worst a top half of the second round guy falls to the 5th round because of factors that did not have to do with his on-field evaluation or getting in trouble off the field or an injury. People just did not like the way that he interviewed. That was what I heard was the deal with Kobe Bryant. So take it for what it's worth. You know, I like his energy on the field too. You know, at Kansas, he was one of those fire starter guys. You know, the infectious energy and getting everyone up. He gets his hand on a ball and like he said, he lets the receiver know about it. And then he's, you know, looking towards the sideline. Everyone's getting jacked up. So, you know, at least as far as his teammates and on the field, the stuff. And again, I watch every snap he took live. That stuff, he was a defensive leader. He was a leader, you know, of the whole defense. And again, sort of a fire starting presence as far as the energy out there. Just have to keep an eye on the other side. I didn't hear more specific than that, but I did follow up on that. I was very curious why, because I didn't have an explanation why this kid fell, especially when the NFL was looking at him the previous year as a draftable prospect. And that's what I was told. So, but yeah, that guy, to me, if that turns out not to be an issue, you essentially extract a free middle rounder. To me, why is the UDFA like I'm the only, you know, sicko out there that puts out UDFA class rankings?
We love it. Yeah.
And I'll tell people out there who think it's ridiculous. Every year in the NFL, more than 20% of the snaps. Now I'm talking special teams, offense, defense, just snaps taken. More than 20% of them are taken by undrafted free agents. That is a big amount of, you know, of snaps being soaked up. I forgot the exact stat, the study that did it, but UDFA is worth more than the 6th and the 7th round combined. And I believe the 5th round as well. I would have to look this. I'm citing off memory, but UDFAs are way more valuable in the aggregate over the ocean to actual NFL games played, I think, than people realize. Yeah. And when you hit on one that can be a multi-year starter for you on a rookie contract. Now it's a rarity, but we see it every year. Yeah. Right. I mean, you know, teams sign 15 of these guys. You're looking for just one of these, right? But if you can get a multi-year starter off the UDFA thing, you don't get a better deal than that. To me, UDFAs, it's the last Moneyball frontier of the NFL, where you can make transactions, where you can get this enormous amount, this war chest of excess value off the transaction cost that you paid. The Vikings have been very good at UDFA since the last 3 years. This is the third straight year that they finished high in my rankings, and they were the only team that finished above the Falcons. And I am coming to you live from Minneapolis, but anyone out there that accuses me of being a homer on this, I gave the Vikings draft class a D. That was just how my metrics went. But the Vikings, one example of this, one of their wins 2 years ago. So that first class of the three, I think the three consecutive class the Vikings had in the top 5 of my UDFA rankings. 2 years ago, they pull out Ivan Pace, who I would have had
one of my guys. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
One of both of our guys. I mean, I would have had him that year, right around where I had Kobe Bryant, for instance, this year. Right. Same thing I'm saying to you about Kobe Bryant. I was saying about Ivan Pace on the Viking shows 2 years ago. Now he's a multi-year. He started as a friggin' rookie, right? So you're going to get 4 years of a starter there of this absolute peanuts contract, right? And the Vikings have had 3, 4, depending on the year, UDFAs that either make the roster or later on, maybe their practice squad, they get elevated. That amount of excess value being pulled out of the UDFAs, it's not a way around the cap, but it's a way to augment your roster, where then you will have more ammo for future free agency classes. The more of these guys that you can get to certainly stick in a valuable role, like a starting linebacker like Ivan Pace was. But I just wanted to say that because, again, Falcons finished number 2 in my rankings. 3 top 225 prospects, 2 top 190 prospects. Kobe Bryant's making that team for sure. Unless there is some systemic personality thing where we just cannot be around this guy. That I haven't heard. Yeah. I haven't heard that. And I got a lot of contacts at Kansas. The thing I heard, that this was not from a Kansas person, this was from an NFL person, that he struggled in the interviews. I didn't hear any more details than that. That's all I know. But that kid should have been drafted. Yeah. Shadir Sanders should have gone a couple of rounds above the round 5 as well. But, what do I know? But, yeah, Kobe Bryant's making that roster for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this was something that we were watching closely because Falcons special teams coach Marquise Williams was one of the Shrine Bowl coaches for Kobe Bryant. And who would know better than him, and I think the Falcons absolutely would have considered drafting Bryant in the 4th round. They visited with him. They seemed to really like him. They talked him up at the Shrine Bowl. So I think they would have been in on him to draft him, but unfortunately they just didn't have any picks, right? I mean, after, I don't think they were going to draft him over Billy Bowman. I mean, I think Bowman was higher on their board and they really liked Bowman as a nickel. I think they would have been happy to take Bryant with their 5th rounder. They just didn't have any more picks till the 7th round. And then that kind of, but yeah.
And Kevin, if that transaction we were talking about before with Pearce, I believe, and this, in the moment, Atlanta, in that trade, they gave up a 7th, right?
Yes. It was the late 7th, yeah.
I'll go as far as to say this. If that pick wasn't traded out in that thing, I believe that would have been used on Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I think they would have loved to draft him earlier too, but again, they were, low on picks. And that's kind of why I before the draft said, they really need, they haven't really respected this UDFA process, in my opinion. That they didn't really take it seriously last year. They were, and maybe these guys can sign elsewhere. I mean, the Falcons weren't exactly a super hot team at the time, and they're still not. But I think they clearly put more effort into it this year, or at least tried to extract more value from it, and that's critical when you only have those 5 picks. They only have the 5 picks, so you kind of have to get value in UDFA if you want to overcome a lack of draft capital. And like you said, I think they absolutely did. They're going to end up coming out quite well when you factor in the UDFAs because of how much extra value they were able to extract from these guys after the draft.
For sure. And Kevin, one thing I like to look at is when I know, especially when you hear something like that, I like to, if you have context on the player, knowing that the player got feedback of this is an area of your game that we would like you to work on, and then the player goes back and tangibly improves on that. To me, that is, I don't know how you could just call it integrity. You could also call it competitive integrity, however you want to do that. But to me, that would seem to portend well when you are considering the projection, right? This kid was told this thing, and then it noticeably improved, right? Like, so let's get into the numbers on this, so I'm not just, talking out of my butt. The year before, 2023, and this kid plays tough. This kid plays feisty. That's not what this is. This was about being the string bean who sometimes the tackle technique wasn't there when to the degree it had to be to overcome that wiriness. Like at the contact point, he's never going to be winning the power battle. So you have to even mind your technique a little bit more. The year before, 2023, and he was very good in 2023, missed tackle rate that year for Kobe Bryant, 17.9%. That's high, right? Year before, 12.2. That's closer to acceptable. His freshman year, 2021, this is a kid who played all 4 years on teams that were mostly making bowl games at Kansas. The year before, 21.2% missed tackle rate. That is red siren type, so, but then 17.9 is big red flag as well. This past season, 2024, Kobe Bryant, 91.3 PFF run defense grade. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we start there. Missed tackle percentage drops from 17.9 to 8.5.
Yeah,
that is significant.
Yeah, drastic.
You're evaporating more than half of the missed tackles from the year before, right? And sometimes, as you know, out there on the perimeter, when you're in space, you miss a tackle there, that's where you can see chunk plays, right? Mm-hmm. You evaporate half those, all of a sudden, those go away. Not only that, run stops go from 12 the year before to 22. So he was getting more involved, and his tackle rate, more than half got cut. The missed tackle rate, I'm sorry. So to me, that stuff was impressive. I like I said, like him in coverage, very, very feisty player. Last year, 4 interceptions, 4 passes broken up. We can add him, Kevin, to the getting the hands on the balls, right? Yep. We were talking about that with the safeties. 4 interceptions year before, 3 before that, 2 the year before, 13 career interceptions, 18 career passes defense, and 7 career touchdowns allowed in coverage. Pretty good playing at the highest level, playing in the power 4 as a 4-year starter. And a kid also, you brought up the special teams. Despite being a 4-year starter, sometimes 4-year starters, they don't play. I don't want to say any names. There's a couple examples I could give for this, but I don't know how specific I want to be on this. There was a player in this draft class who fell a little bit further, I think, than people thought, and I was told this was by an NFL head coach that the reason was because the kid didn't play special teams in college. Like at all. Yeah. And so like that, and like sometimes the counterpoint is made, well, but he was a star and he was a starter and, blah, blah, blah. Kobe Bryant, despite being the 4-year starter, he accrued, it was over 242 career special team stats. He wasn't a core guy, but he was on one of the units throughout all 4 years. And then he sprinkled in on a couple of the other ones. But he at least got, and he was a solid special teamer. Like you look at the grades, he, make the tackles and whatnot. Yeah. That's a guy that could potentially hang on at least a couple, like the field goal block is what Kansas liked him on in particular. But if he can just, okay, I'll plug 1 or 2 special team spots, and you like the projection on me, the starter kit that I'm presenting as a developmental cornerback prospect, the next level. It's pretty simple with him, right? Yeah. Keep adding weight, keep working on that tackling technique. We like the way you cover, we like the way you play, we like that feistiness. I think you're cooking with something here.
Yeah, I think so too. I really like that pickup. I think he's going to probably the Falcons are doing okay at corner. Slot was their biggest weakness, but I think long-term you're obviously looking to get cheaper at corner too if you can. Mike Hughes is they finally, wised up and figured out, hey, the Chiefs played Mike Hughes outside and he was good. Maybe we should do that. So they did that last year, and it was good. He gets an extension here at $6 million per, which I think if he continues playing like last year, it's actually pretty good value for him. But I think, long term, with you paying Terrell like elite corner money, you would like to have cheaper options available to you. And I think maybe over the next few years, Kobe Bryant's going to work his way into that role. That's kind of what I'm hoping for there. But you mentioned, the next guy kind of going down your rankings here would be the 7th round pick, Jack Nelson, who I didn't watch before the draft. I knew they were in on like developmental tackles. I watched more like Logan Brown and guys like that. But you actually have Jack Nelson pretty high, even in the top 200. So you seem to quite like Jack Nelson. So tell me more about his game.
The way that I saw him was, you have like the sure things in any position group, but obviously this one talking about tackle, you have like the sure ones that you love. In this class, we had 3, they all went top 9. And then you have sort of your next tier of like, these guys aren't going to step in and we can trust them on day one as starters, like the top, those top 3 guys that went top 9, but like, the next best, maybe they could, or at least we feel really, really good about them developmentally. The next tier of 2 would have been Simmons and Connerly. Am I forgetting a name? But anyway, and then after that, like the top developmental dudes. After all those tiers, now this might be damning with faint praise, but Jack Nelson was the dude I wanted because Jack Nelson has all the tools. Jack Nelson, like when you're like the late round, we're gonna throw a dart. That was the tackle I wanted was Jack Nelson, 6'7", 316. He has the length, he has the experience, he has the pedigree. You were always expecting Jack Nelson, like at one point, okay, this year he's going to be dominant, right? Because again, with all the experience and all that sort of stuff, he never quite got to that realm. Last year, just to toss this out for people, get a quantifiable metric on it. Last year, he got up to a 79.9 PFF grade. But like that sort of dominant tackle play that Wisconsin kept expecting, he was just like solid, now a bit more solid, and now he's like a good Big Ten starter. But he never quite seemed to be the sum of his parts. But again, he has the parts, right? And he never embarrassed himself. He played early in the Big Ten against vicious front sevens. He never embarrassed himself. So it's like, I've gone through this progression with Jack Nelson. So it's like, I can't say he can get, because he's going to need to be a starting NFL tackle, but he has tools where he could become one, which is different than some of these other late round tackles that were being bandied about. It's like, yeah, that guy ain't tackle. He had no chance. This is a road to nowhere. Jack Nelson, you can actually dream on it. And again, they did not take him at a price point where it's like, oh, that's egregious. In fact, they got him at a really good one. Mm-hmm. Yeah. At that point in the draft, like that's who you want there.
Yeah. No, I mean, and looking at PFF's thoughts, it seems like he's just a better zone blocker. He doesn't have the power for man gap stuff, but the Falcons don't run much man gap, so they probably don't care a whole lot about that. I think we'd all like to see a little bit more of it because Bijan seems to actually do really well in those concepts, but they're going to run mostly zone. That's just what they do. And it seems like his biggest weakness is that he just doesn't crush those gap power stuff. But I mean, the stats all look like he's on an upward trajectory. You love to see that. He played mostly left. I imagine they'll want to get him trained up on the right side as well to potentially, I think they'd obviously like to have him maybe as like a long-term swing tackle. I think people expecting him to just like take over for McGarry next year or something. It's probably too rich, but maybe he could be your long-term swing and you could go from there. But, they're definitely looking to upgrade McGarry's pass protection long-term, given that he's now, the blindside protector. But will it be Jack Nelson that's the answer to that? I don't know, but I think he's at least intriguing, and that's, I think, what they were looking for at this point in the draft. So
definitely. Yeah, I think so. The leverage thing, that's the thing I don't know if it ever like fully comes in, and this goes back to the gap against zone thing, right? I mean, he's high-legged and he has trouble getting down to blow people out of those gaps, but gets out of his stance very quick, and he can go out hunting at the second level. The leverage thing in a phone booth, again, that's it's going to be a bugaboo going forward. It's never going to change. But yeah, you get him into the correct system, and he found it. That's what he needs to develop in, and you got a shot there.
Yeah. So that one's interesting to me. And then the other top 200 guy for this team was Josh Gray from Oregon State, who, again, not a guy I watched. And interestingly, you have him as a center, and people were asking, like, well, where's the Falcons' backup center? Like, we got Ryan Newsel. They seem to have.
That's the guy.
It seems like you actually view him as a center, so I'm really more interested in this now than when I thought he was just another guard to add to the competition. So,
yeah, it's uncomfortable for me because, I've spent years making fun of terrible Terry Fontenot, and he's never on the same page with me. But this year, barring the risk of that trade, which
right.
I personally wouldn't have been
too spicy for you.
Home.
Yeah.
But there is a path to it working out again. But like, not only were they picking guys that, in a lot of the slots I would have been picking, and then UDFA going after the guys that I would have been going after. They also, a couple of these position converts.
Yeah.
It seemed as though they seen them this exact same way that I did too. So it's a little uncomfortable for me. I mean, maybe, this process, I could have been working in the Falcons war room, because great. That is how I saw him. I think you could do guard as well. I ended up comping him to Danny Pinter, as another kind of guy like this, where it's very athletic. He had some play strength limitations, but it was a guy you like the frame as far as how stretched out it is, and then that athletic profile. You have some limitations with the reach and the length, obviously. It's going to play better inside, but has experience, has that athletic profile. Talking about the zone blocking system, Gray had to go to a zone blocking system. I do believe this is your center too. And we'll see. Maybe that guy develops into a long-term starter there as well. And again, at any position where you can extract even 1 year of starting from a UDFA is a bonanza. Even if it's you're just a league average starter, or even if you're the 22nd best starter at your position in the NFL, is enormous excess value over what you paid for that transaction. And I do think that Gray has a shot. I really like the way that he moves out there. And very, very experienced. I like the way he plays the game.
Yeah, they definitely seem to have a type on the offensive line. They want the super athletes, and he does seem to check that box. And yeah, I think they would love to. They've had success with center converts. Like Ryan Newsel's a great example. He's probably going to be their starter. They seem really happy with him. So
didn't Newsel come out of Oregon State too?
I feel like it's been forever. I don't even remember, but it might have been. I'm trying to. Yeah, we got to look this up.
Hold on, I'll look it up.
See, we can keep the pipeline going here, but.
Yeah. He was Appalachian State.
Yeah. It's another state. Another state.
Close
enough. Yeah.
But, I think Oregon State had another Newsel. I'll have to look on
possible,
that later.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's stuck in the back of the recesses of my brain.
Yes, and then the other guy that was like really high up, because the rest of these UDFAs are all in the 300s or lower. But you mentioned Nick Nash. I had to watch his, because people were like, "Oh, you got to watch Nick Nash. He's exciting. Like the production is." Absurd. Like, I mean, we're talking about Triple Crown winner, and that's like, yes, it's Mountain West. Like, I get it. Ashton GT played the Mountain West, I mean, so, it didn't seem to hurt him too much, but obviously there are athletic limitations with Nash, like watching his stuff, but he just seems to get it. Like, this is a guy that's only played receiver for 2 years. Like, you don't just, I think there's something here. Like, I mean, I think, yes, not the best athlete, has trouble getting off press, but I think San Jose State, like, kudos to that coaching staff. They were like, if he struggles to get off press, why don't we just put him in the slot? And then he has like the Triple Crown win, 16 touchdowns, almost 1,400 yards, like absurd stats. In 2 years of being a wide receiver, he's got the size. I think he's interesting. And you look at what the Falcons have brought in, like, before, this draft at wide receiver, in terms of their, futures contracts and just kind of pickups, almost all like big slot or outside receiver types. There's just a couple of little guys I think they want to kind of back up Darnell Mooney and like be returners, but otherwise it's all big 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". Like, I think the team wants to get a big slot, either have Drake move there or have a big slot eventually take over for Ray McLeod to get more Rams-like, obviously, right? They want a guy there that can block. They want a guy there that can be interchangeable with Drake on the outside. Because that's really the only prop. Like, Ray, I think, is way better than anyone thought he would be in Atlanta. So props to him. But, like, he's not interchangeable with Drake on the outside. Like, if they want Drake to play the slot on a play, they can't just move Ray outside. That doesn't really work. So, I do think Nick Nash is kind of fascinating for this offense as a potential guy that maybe could work his way into wide receiver 3 eventually.
Yeah, I agree. And if nothing else, I think he's got a decent shot to make this roster attack his cheap depth there. Right. You can do different stuff with him, and he's reliable. And then one other thing I was thinking about while you were talking about that was a constitution of Washington's receiving core when Mr. Penix is out there. He likes throwing to his big slots too.
Yep.
Right. There, and not only the bigger slots, but the interchangeable thing you were talking about. You would see Odunze get moved there. And then both Polk and McMillan in the slot. So they would flip them around depending on the matchups that they liked. Penix likes throwing to those big slots and super comfortable with the interchangeable, sort of receivers that can play multiple different roles there. So hopefully that works out. And I do think Nick Nash is going to make this roster. Yeah. I think he's going to be McLeod's backup next year. So I think he's slot 2. I think Gray is center 2. Bryant is going to be a backup at one of them position 2. So I think Atlanta extracted out 3 guys that are going to make this roster and are going to be primary backups next season.
Yeah.
So that is slick work in UDFA.
Yeah, you love to see it. And, most of these other guys are more like typical UDFA grades. I know the Falcons specifically said Malik Verdon is going to move to linebacker for them, which I thought was interesting. He's big.
He has an interesting profile. Yeah, that's inspired. 6'4", 219, 92nd percentile athlete. So I like where they're going there. Have some coverage limitation, but you move him to linebacker, you just let him run around sideline to sideline. That's nice. And then a couple thoughts on the other ones. Yeah. Joshua Simon is interesting to me because Josh Simon, he has some receiving skill, and I like the guys that are a bit unorthodox, and Josh Simon certainly fits into this. Let me pull up my tight end sheet. He has really interesting physical dimensions where 6'4", 239. So certainly on the slider side, but he has an 83-inch wingspan, which was, I'm looking down, I believe that was the biggest in the tight end class. Wow. And for, he's going to be sort of in the NFL. He's not an inline guy. He's like your sort of H-backy type fella. But I like the guys where it's like an optical illusion for the defender because Josh Simon's catch radius is a lot bigger than you would think just standing across from him, right? And he can access that. He's got pretty good hands. He knows how to run a route. Last year, he only dropped 2 balls last year. So I think in 2.69 yards per route run against man coverage is pretty good. South Carolina didn't use him as much against zone, but he was beating man coverage, 55 targets last year. There again, receiving skill with Josh Simon, and you have the bigger catch radius than you think. You're going to have to use him in that sort of move role where it would pull the slot receiver out the field. But we've been mentioning some of the ideas that Atlanta might have with the slot receiver anyway. So maybe Josh Simon can make an argument to them of hanging around on that roster. And it's an interesting profile after that. And one other name I had to shout out is Nate Carter. Nate Carter made my 500 board mostly because of phone calls I got immediately after his pro day workout. There was some fawning going on about Nate Carter in East Lansing during his pro day workout because he stole the show, as a guy that didn't go to the combine. And I don't think people thought he was the athlete that he ended up being, but he was the star of the show there. Like I said, 5'9", 200 pounds, 91st percentile size adjusted athlete. And he's got some wheels on him, Nate Carter. Got a little bit stranded in the situation moving to Michigan State because they had rough offense here. Ever since the transition to, it sucked under the Mel Tucker, who they got out of there as well. But Jonathan Smith, they're building that thing. Jonathan Smith, of course, he comes from Oregon State. He brought over a quarterback with him, Aiden Childs, and he really struggled last year. And so the offense there was not good, and opposing defenses would stack the box against them because Childs can move around a little bit, but and he's got some arm talent, but the accuracy was bad last year. And so defenses weren't concerned with him down the field. But Carter, I ended up comping Carter to Blake Watson. It's a guy, where I think there is some intrigue there. At least a guy bring into the building. We know he's an NFL caliber athlete, and there are circumstantial reasons to explain why maybe, the end of his career, get to Michigan State, why it wasn't quite as impressive as maybe you would have thought on the field. So that was another guy I had to shout out.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love to hear about these guys. Definitely a super interesting UDFA class. Looks like the Falcons are on the right track there. We're able to extract some additional value that they really needed to get, considering their lack of picks. And yeah, I mean, I know you don't really do this, but like, you look at the whole picture of the whole thing they got, including the draft and the UDFAs. Like, how do you sort of see this whole class in terms of, I mean, you don't have to put a grade on it, but do you feel like good about sort of how the Falcons came out of this and about their 2025 prospects, where it's all of a sudden very desperate that they now have to be, winning games in 2025?
Yeah. I do. So my last column concept, of the draft process, like I do the UDFA, and then the last one I shove them together, where I add basically, it's what I try to do of like draft equity spent, like, right. That's the money that you brought to the market this spring, as it were. And then the talent that you acquired in the draft plus the talent that you acquired in the UDFA, and basically try to get like an overall ROI, in there on that. And then, put all the metrics for the again, talent acquired in draft, talent acquired in UDFA. I think Atlanta is going to do pretty decent in that. The ROI out of the draft, I mentioned before, I believe I had it top 3. You have to bake that trade in a little bit, and the risk of it, of course, the Pearce one. But again, just the players in the slots that you picked, and then crush a UDFA, absolutely crush a UDFA. And that was a totally different strategy than we had seen from Atlanta the 2 previous years. And I think, it speaks to the urgency inside that front office and them being on the hot seat. I don't care what led to it. This is the way a team like this should be. Every team should be attacking UDFA like this. Again, that money ball frontier that we talked about, and you run into one, you get the peanut starter, and that has positive effects the rest of your roster as well. Money that you can spend in free agency. So Atlanta's going to do much better in those rankings this year than they have the past couple. I'll have to get back to you when I do run those numbers as far as where they finished. But Atlanta, a good process, I would say, for Atlanta this year. Holistically, the one thing is pending out there, but overall, I would give them a positive grade this year for sure.
Yeah. Well, at this point, if they nail this and we're coming back to this conversation next offseason with the Falcons, only giving away a pick in the 20s or something, we might have to come up with a new nickname for Terry. We might have to go to Terrific. Yeah. We might have to go to Terrific Terry or something. So we'll have to monitor that. Because his name is too good to not use a nickname. I mean, obviously there's so many good ones available, but
it for sure is. And if I do indeed end up having to give a public apology to Terry, no, I don't see it coming, but if he proves me wrong, I will apologize to you, Terry, and I will do it on Kevin's show.
Okay. Well, we'll Falcons fans are definitely, pulling for that outcome. So, we all want the teams to do well, obviously. No, other than the Saints, I don't want them to do well, but yeah, other than that.
After Bonnie did, I'm with you.
Yeah. I figured, it seems like it's funny in the NFC South, it's kind of like, everyone's like, oh yeah, what do you think about these teams? Oh yeah, they're rivals. Yeah, don't like them. It's Saints. Like, oh yeah, we just hate these guys. Yeah, everybody hates the Saints. So,
that's how we all feel about the Packers.
Yeah,
in the NFC North.
I feel like it's always like that. There's just like one team. Everyone's like, we don't like them.
Anyone but them.
Yeah, anyone but. Yeah. But Thor, thank you so much, guys. He's at Thor KU on the Twitters. Thor, tell the people where they can find your UDFA NFC rankings, which are coming out on Tuesday. Here, Fantasy Life, I believe, is the site, but let you plug it.
Fantasylife.com. Check out those UDFA rankings. I'll have AFC will be dropping on Thursday, of course. NFC on Tuesday, and then next week I'll be dropping those Hall rankings where we shove everyone together, and then I have fun with some of the different metrics that I have. And I don't know where Atlanta finishing though. So you'll have to, everyone will have to check back. It'll be a surprise to me too when I run those numbers, but I feel like Atlanta is going to be finishing pretty decent in that one.
Yeah. I'm excited to see how that shakes out. Definitely feeling better about this class than last year. Although, the Penix pick in hindsight certainly is looking better. So we'll hope that was the start of the Terry Sance, and we can get
I love it.
Yeah, we'll hope for the best there. But Thor, thanks again for your time. We'll definitely talk to you again at some point here. And yeah, guys, go check it out over on Fantasy Life. All that great intel if you're looking for more draft content here as we get into the slow season. But Thor, thanks again, guys. Like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Go follow Thor. And yeah, we'll be back on Wednesday with another show for you guys. Until then, please like, subscribe, check out the Patreon, check out all that good stuff. And we'll be back on Dirty Birds and Brews. Have a great day, folks. Thanks.